in Roswell, and they have 2 children, Levi, who's 5, and Abigail, who is 13 months. Before she stayed home with her family, she was a middle school teacher, and she also has a photography business, Mandi Photography, which she's been running for 11 years, right, over a decade. So she loves hiking, traveling, and spending time with her family. And she's not a MOPS mama, just logistically, it doesn't work out for her schedule, but she's been part of the Dunwoody Baptist community for over a decade, I think, a long time. So anyway, she's going to come up and share with us right now. So please welcome Mandi.
That was the last picture of all of us before my dad died.
Caroline, you're going to change the bit.
I know, both my adopted and my birth mom were very short, under 5 feet.
Good morning. Thank you guys so much for having me. Again, I'm Mandi, and okay.
Sorry, that was
And I may take it off.
too bad Andrea missed it. She was so much better.
So yeah, I love that Caroline came up and talked because we got to hear a quick little testimonial from an adoptee, and I am adoptive. I'm an adoptive mom. And I'm an adoptive aunt. So my daughter is adopted, and my nephew is adopted, and my sister is actually in the process of adopting their second child as well. So it's really big in my family. We joke often that my mom would only have 1 grandchild if it weren't for adoption. We're very thankful for it and what it means to our family. So raise your hand if you know someone personally, family member, friend, you've adopted yourself. Raise your hand if you know someone. Adoption is in your life somehow. Okay, that's almost everybody in this room, which I love. I feel like this generation has stepped up in a mighty way to adopt. In ways that hasn't really been in the, like Caroline was saying, like in the 80s, no one adopted. She didn't know anybody who adopted. And for me, like I can name off like 8 dozen of my friends that are close friends that have adopted or are in the process of doing so as well. And I just think it's really cool to see the Lord working in this generation, because He tells us to take care of the orphans and the widows, and the orphan side obviously is the adoption portion of it. So. There's us. There's Abigail in the corner there. And these pictures that you see right now are actually of, we had a photographer come during her birth. I was very blessed to get to be there. And so you'll see some of the emotions that happened the day of. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. So, okay, so my husband Josh and I have been married for 11 years. And we have a biological son, Levi. He is 5. And when he was 15 months old, we decided to add to our family. It was very easy to get pregnant with Levi, so much so that we got pregnant the first month that we got pregnant with him, and we're like, let's do this again. And so I wasn't expecting it to happen that quickly again, but I didn't expect to walk the journey that we have come to at this point. Our road was very different in trying to grow our family this time around, and months went by and no pregnancy. I, as a photographer, have a blog that I blog on consistently. I use it for my business, but I also use it for personal stuff as well. And I started blogging around 8 months in, because Levi was at that age where everyone's like, so when are you going to give him a sibling? I'm like, I'm working on it.
Oh gosh.
And I wasn't saying that at that time, but around 8 months in, I decided to really kind of start to share our story. And 8 months in the scheme of things really isn't that long, but you know, when you're trying from month to month, if you've been there with fertility, infertility or second infertility, you know, like each month is like a heart-wrenching time when your period comes and you're like, yes, but not really. And so I started informing people that we were trying, and but I never knew how much help and inspiration it would be to others, and ultimately because of our openness, or my openness of our journey, which led to the adoption of our daughter. If I had not been sharing what was going on in our lives, the people who were involved in getting our daughter for us or bringing her to us would not have known. So one of the hardest part was all the comments from the people. I am amazed at the things that people would say to me. Like at the grocery store, random strangers would say, I need to get on that. Like, get on what? Like, okay. People would tell me I need to get my son a sibling. People would say that I needed to work to have another kid because I didn't want to have an age gap that was too big so that my kids could play together. Like, people would tell that to me. People at church, people at At different things that I would have people telling me, and eventually I got to a point where I would just say, okay, I appreciate the comment, not really, but I would always just say, whenever the Lord chooses to bless us with another child. And a lot of people understood when I said that meant, hey, we're trying, but it's not happening. I even had someone go as far to tell me that we were not doing it right and that we should practice more to make a baby. And that was about 1.5 years into our journey, and that comment sent me to the restroom crying. And let me tell you, that was real fun. So for those first few months, I really kept quiet about it, like I said, but eventually I started sharing our story and asking for prayers to add to our family. So I would say, when the Lord chooses to bless us, or, we would love to add to our family if you could pray for us or something. And so 2 years later, we still weren't pregnant. We were clumped into that unexplained infertility category because we had done all the testing. Everything came back saying there was no real reason we couldn't get pregnant. And so at this point, we really began to pray and consider our options. But as we did so, we really felt the Lord was telling us, wait. I felt like he was telling us to not do anything to try and get pregnant. I felt like he was telling us no to adoption. He was telling us to wait on him. And this was really hard. I had friends who had kids after Levi who were having their second and sometimes third at that point. And I was having a hard time, but I reminded myself that I was blessed to have Levi, but my desire to have another child was still there. And another hard part of it was during that time, I felt so much guilt and people almost guilting me into I should be content with Levi. I should be happy that I have a child, and I shouldn't be selfishly asking for a second one, because there's a lot of women out there who just can't have a first child. And that was hard for me, dealing with the kind of the emotional kind of guilt that I had in that. And I'll say second infertility is a weird place to be in. If you have been there, know my heart, and you know what I'm talking about. I'm not saying it's harder than primary infertility, which is you can't get pregnant at all or the first. But it's just different because I have a kid and everyone expects that I can have another one. I had a biological son and everyone's like, when are you having a second one? But I couldn't, and so going to play dates were very hard because Levi was 3, 4 at that time, and all of his little buddies had siblings that were younger than him, and so I was constantly inundated with babies all over the place. Birthday parties, play dates. I go to the park and I couldn't go to the park and not look around and find a kid and then look at the pregnant mom. And then me being myself, just feeling sad for myself, being well, that sucks because I'm happy for them, but I want one too. And so I was even in a Bible study group with young moms, and I was literally the only one in the group that didn't have 2 or more kids. And they would talk and complain about, not complain, but we complain. They would complain about, it was just so hard to get to Bible study this morning with my 4 children. And I'm like, I want another kid. Let's just make it hard for me. I would love that hardness to get to Bible study and be late because I had one of them throw up and poop all over me this morning. Please give me a child to poop and throw up all over me. And so in the moment, when you're in those things, you forget about the blessings that you have. Because obviously it's hard. Even now I'm like, oh man, I'm so tired. Abigail woke me up 4 times last night. I'm like, I love you, but child, go to sleep. And clearly I'm very thankful for her. And so, but it was just hard being surrounded by it. So back in the spring of 2016, I go to a Bible study called BSF International. And we were actually reading through the book of John. And in the book of John is the story of a man named Lazarus. Some of you probably know Lazarus. He died, and then Jesus raises him back from the dead. But one of the things that people don't know about Lazarus and the story of him is if you've grown up in the church or you know anything about Bible, the shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept, and he wept over the death of Lazarus. And the funny thing is Jesus actually was told about Lazarus' illness days before. Jesus was a couple days travel away, but he was close enough to where he could have left where he was to go and heal Lazarus and make him well. And that's what he was asked to do. And Jesus said, no, I'm going to wait here. And when he did find out that Lazarus had actually died, that is when he went over to see him. And a lot of people don't remember that part of the story. They just know that Jesus raised him from the dead. So I'll read this to you. It says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary, this is the Mary whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, and was the one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped her feet with his hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, 'Lord, the one you love is sick.'" And they call him the one you love, like they know it's a close relationship. When he heard this, Jesus said, "The sickness will not end in death." He said, "No, for it is God's glory. It is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed 2 more days. So he loved them, so he stayed 2 more days. That doesn't really make any sense in, my human mind. But then he said to the disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." And so as I read this story, I remember one of the things that struck out to me was verse 4. Jesus could have gone and healed Lazarus. And he could have if he wanted to, but he chose to stay away. And he chose to stay away in order to bring people to him and to glorify himself more. Jesus had healed a number of people at this point, but he had not brought anybody back from the dead. And so healing someone's great, and that's awesome, clearly, obviously. I've never healed anybody like that. But bringing him back from the dead, Jesus knew was going to bring him more glory than even healing him. So how does that relate to my story? Ironically, or not so ironically enough, the same morning that I read this story to Levi, I was actually going to the last BSF of the year, and it was called Sharing Day, and we share our stories and everything. And I knew in that moment when I was reading the children's version of Lazarus' death to my son that the Lord was prompting me in the Holy Spirit to share my heart at Sharing Day. So I talk about how Jesus waited for Lazarus to die. And so my life as a Christian and believer is to bring the most glory to the Lord through my life and however I'm possible to do so. So I sat there waiting for a child. I prayed and genuinely mean it when I say that I wanted our story to bring the most glory to the Lord no matter what happened. And so I ended up, after a while, it was this moment, I put his glory before my own desires. And if that meant that we were to wait another 5 years because conception was nothing short of a miracle, then I prayed that prayer. And if it meant that we were supposed to adopt because the story could only be orchestrated by the Lord, then I prayed that prayer. And I also prayed that if it meant that we were to never have another baby because God would use me in our story, then I prayed that prayer. And it didn't mean that I stopped wanting a baby. It just meant that I really finally, after 2.5 years, really just gave it to God and said, "You know what, Lord, I've heard that you told me to wait, and I don't understand why, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it willingly. I'm going to do it to bring you the most glory." And during this whole time, I'm blogging. Every couple months, I'm kind of sharing a little bit of our story and what's going on, just updating people. But y'all, a week later, I was approached by Judy's husband. He's a pastor of our church here, and he asked me and Josh if we had ever considered adoption, and that there was a baby that needed a family, and that was due in the fall of last year. And I told my pastor that we had considered adoption before, but that we had never felt like the Lord was telling us to do so. We felt the same way, like I said, about the interventions with the fertility clinic, so we had been waiting, and I can't explain it any other way than the Lord just knew that he told us no to both of these situations. But I did tell Pastor Allen that I would talk to my husband about it, and but I did not find it coincidence that 2 weeks prior we had actually been approached about another baby. Someone else from our church came up to me and said, "Hey, there's a baby that's due next month. Do you guys want it?" And we prayed about it, and the Lord made it very clear that that was not our child very quickly. And so I kind of assumed that that was going to be the case with this child, but God had different plans. And so I really wasn't expecting the Lord to say yes to this. But I mean, literally never in the entire time we've been 2.5 years at that point, we've been waiting for a child, had anyone been like, "Hey, there's a baby, do you want it? And then 2 weeks in a row I get asked the same question. And so I couldn't take that as a coincidence. I really had to listen to the Lord, like, talking to me through those circumstances. And so Joshua and I, like, did a lot of talking, a lot of praying, and neither one of us felt a direct no from the Lord. We didn't hear yes yet, but we definitely did not feel like he was telling us no like he had prior. And so after a week of praying and discussing about it, we really felt like we were supposed to pursue talking to the birth family. Abigail's birth grandmother goes to church here, and her biological sister goes to church here. And so that's how Pastor Allen knew about Abigail, because her grandmother approached him and said, "My daughter's pregnant. She is unable to care for the child. Do you know of anybody who wants a baby?" And 2 years, about actually a year prior to us being approached about Abigail, I had been, I was at a Christian women's conference, and the Lord told a woman who I did not know at the time, we're really good friends now, but told her to tell me that we were going to have another baby. And so he revealed to this complete stranger that we were going to have another child at some point, because he's just very, he didn't have to do that. It was very cool that he did that for us. And, you know, knowing me and our human self, I was like, did he tell you when? Did he tell you how long I'm going to have to wait for that second baby? And she said, no, he didn't. I said, of course he didn't. But I, during that time, thought in my head, like, have another baby meant I was going to get pregnant again. So I was not looking into, like, the adoption world at all. And not because again, obviously I'm not against it in any way, but I just really felt like the Lord was telling us that we were going to have another child, biologically. And so after a week of discussing and praying about it, we really felt like we were supposed to talk to the birth family. We met with Abigail's grandmother, and she told us their story. And there were so many parts of the story that, like, if you look at it, it's like, oh, that's like about 20 coincidences. And that's not, they weren't coincidences. It was clearly the Lord weaving our story into theirs even before we knew that she was going to be our child. But we talked to her. Pastor Allen came to our house as well, so the four of us sat down together and just did a lot of crying and talking during the meeting. And her grandmother left, and my husband and I were just sitting there at the table, like, just looking at each other. And I'll say this about Josh. We dated for a year and a half before he told me he loved me. And it's because he has to really know. Like, he's not one to make quick decisions. And so he has to really know things are what they're supposed to be. It took us a year and a half to find our house. After being married for 6 years, when I wanted to buy a house, the very first month we were married. And anytime he's switched a job, it's basically been me being like, yes, you're supposed to do this. The Lord's telling me. And so it takes him a little while to make these big decisions. So when he looked at me 20 minutes later and said, we're adopting that baby, I knew, I felt the same thing, but it was an even more affirmation. I knew that she was ours. And he's like, the Lord's never spoken more clearly to me in my life. And I said, yeah, I see that, because you don't make big decisions very lightly, and this is a really big decision, you know. And so I called her grandmother literally right afterwards. He goes, do you think we should wait? We don't want to seem too anxious, or like, you know. I was like, no. I was like, as we're doing this, there's no reason to wait. And so I called her, and before I even said anything, she says, we're doing this. And I said, yeah. And she knew. She felt it in the meeting. All four of us did. The Holy Spirit made it so clear to us that she was our baby. And so we went and met with Abigail's birth mother that same week, and she basically told her mom, she's like, I trust whoever you guys find, you know, whoever you find for my child. She says, I want her, or we didn't know it was a her at the time, but she says, I want the baby to be raised in a Christian home, and I want her to have a sibling. And so we that category, those qualifications. But so she, we met with her, and it was a very emotional meeting. I don't know, those of you here who have adopted, if you've had a chance to meet with the birth mothers, but it was a very emotional meeting, knowing like that's her child, but we want her child, and we want to raise her child as our own. And there's a lot of emotions that go through the adoption process that I watched it through my sister and her adopting of her son, but I never experienced it as an adoptive parent, and I didn't know kind of how to experience that. But we were very blessed that she said yes, and she lived locally here in Atlanta, actually in Dunwoody at the time. And so the next day they went and had an ultrasound, and I actually had made an adoption announcement. I wasn't going to share it until like a couple months later, until we were a little more in the journey with her, but I made it, and I made it pink because the Lord told me we were having a little girl, and I knew it. And so when they called me the next day and said we were having a little girl, I was like, yep, I already knew that. And so I was very, very blessed. I got to walk through the pregnancy with her. She was 19 weeks when we matched, which is early in the pregnancy in an adoption process, because most agencies don't match you until about a month or two before the mother's due, just for opportunities for failed adoptions to happen or less when it comes to that. But her birth mom knew that she wasn't in a place to be able to take her and raise her, and so she already has Abigail's sister who's being raised by her grandmother, and she has a brother as well that we haven't met yet, but at some point we will, because it's some biological families raising her as well. So, and so I got to walk through the pregnancy with her. I got to go to ultrasounds. I got to go to all OB appointments with her. After that, she invited me. I didn't ask. She wanted me to come, and I was very thankful for that. She didn't have to do that for me. And then she wanted me to be in the delivery room. She delivered at Northside, just like I delivered Levi at Northside. And I got to be in the delivery room, got to cut the cord, got to hold her, got to be a big part of that experience. I kind of joked that I got to be the dad in the room. Like, I literally watched my daughter be born, and I was like, well, that's kind of a really cool experience. Like, I got to actually have my son, I got to do it that way, and then I got to be the dad in the other room. And so she was very gracious. I had told her, I said, you know, we have a friend who wants to take pictures for us on Abigail's birthday. But I told her, I was like, you won't have to see him. He won't be in your way. I'm just going to have him take pictures of us in the lobby. And, you know, like, I didn't even have to tell her that we were doing it. I just wanted to just kind of give her a heads up and just kind of give her, just let her know. And she said, no. She goes, if he's going to be there, I want him to be in the room. And so she delivered Abigail, and Josh, my husband, and the photographer both waited out in the waiting room. And after she was all cleaned up, which was only about 10 minutes later, Josh got to come, and that's the picture you saw where I was opening the door and I'm like sobbing and everything. And then he got to come in, and our photographer friend got to come in and captured all of those pictures of us getting to, see our daughter and everything. And so it was just a huge blessing. And I had him take pictures of her with her birth mother, and I delivered a lot of those pictures for her, so she has some of those as well, which is just a huge blessing for her. So Abigail was born last year on November 2nd. She just celebrated her first birthday, and I truly believe that the Lord had us wait for two main reasons. One, because she was who he had planned for us the whole time. If we had adopted earlier on, we would have obviously been super happy with the baby, but we wouldn't have our daughter, and we wouldn't have this amazing story that I get to share a testimony to and give the Lord so much glory to it. But because of my pain and suffering, he wanted to use me, like I said, for his glory, and that's really what it comes down to. He used me during this time to be an encouragement to a lot of others who are going through second infertility. I actually started a Facebook group, and there's about 35 of us now in the group who have dealt with or are dealing with second infertility. There's like 7 of us who have either adopted now or have gotten pregnant. And it's just really cool to see like the Lord use that. And last kind of really cool part of my story is there's, some of you guys know Amy Beckler. She was in MOPS with you guys for a couple years. She goes the one in Roswell now, but She's one of my best friends, and our sons are 2 months apart in age, and they are best friends. Like, they were out of town last week, and Levi was like crying because he misses Nene so much, or Nathan so much. Like, he's like, I want Nathan home. I'm like, I know, they'll be back. And so we decided that round 2 would be really fun if we could do it again together. And she got pregnant last year, and I didn't. And I knew that I was not getting pregnant. I just had this kind of feeling. I actually have been diagnosed with endometriosis, which is most likely the reason why we aren't getting pregnant. But come to find out, her due date was November 2nd, and we found out that Abigail's due date was November 1st. And not only that, though, so their due dates are a day apart, but babies come early, 33 weeks, unfortunately, and sometimes 42 weeks. And so they could have had a big gap in age, but they did not, because these 2 babies were born 3 hours apart on the same day, at the same hospital. And I got to go from one room with my daughter to the next room with my best friend and her son. And it was the Lord just kind of just putting a cherry on top. He didn't have to do that, but it was His way. And I say this with most certainty. I knew in that moment, the second that Evan was born, and the fact that Abigail was born 3 hours afterwards, that she was going to be our child. Because there was in adoption, there's a revocation period. In Georgia it's 10 days, and I knew that during that 10-day period she could have taken her back from us. But in the moment that Abigail was born, the same time as Evan, I knew that the Lord was not going to give me that birthday of my daughter and then me have a constant reminder of her being taken away, and then have Evan's birthday constantly in my face for the rest of my life. And I knew it was just like this sweet little hug. It was like, this baby is yours, and she's gonna always be yours. And so that's kind of our story. Lord's just, I know it's not always, I know some of you are probably still walking something like this, and it's hard. And I know it's not always wrapped up in a bow like our story was, and 3 years of infertility really isn't that long compared to 9 or, waiting journeys. But I'm just so thankful that the Lord saw fit to bring Abigail into our family when He did, and in the way He did. Because, like I said, when I prayed, I said, Lord, if we're to adopt, then it's only going to be because You have orchestrated it in such a magnificent way, and that's what He chose to do. So, thank you guys so much.